The laundry basket was overflowing with Patricia's soccer uniforms and James's work shirts when he said it. Our living room was bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun, filtering through the blinds we'd installed when we first bought this modest three-bedroom in Lansing. It was Tuesday, always laundry day in our household, as predictable as the seasons. "Mary," James said, his voice unusually quiet as he folded one of Patricia's t-shirts with meticulous care, "I've been thinking about something." I hummed in response, my hands automatically matching socks that had survived the dryer's notorious appetite. 13 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the different tones of my husband's voice. This one sent a small shiver down my spine, the kind you get when you sense a storm approaching on what had been a clear day. What if Patricia isn't mine? The black sock in my right hand never found its match. I froze, my fingers suddenly numb. The background noise of Patricia practicing piano in the next room seemed to fade away, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "What did you say?" I managed, though I'd heard him perfectly. James wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands stilled on the half-folded shirt, fingers pressing into the cotton as if searching for something hidden within its fibers. "I know it sounds crazy," he continued, his voice still unnaturally controlled. "But what if Patricia isn't biologically mine?" 13 years of memories flashed before my eyes in that moment. The positive pregnancy test I'd shown him on Christmas morning, the ultrasound printout we'd framed, his trembling hands cutting the umbilical cord in the delivery room of Sparrow Hospital. The late-night feedings, first steps, kindergarten orientation, all of it witnessed and shared together. "James, what are you talking about?" I set down the orphan sock, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Of course she's yours. How could you even?" "At the family reunion last weekend," he interrupted, finally looking up. His hazel eyes, usually warm and crinkled at the corners when he smiled, now appeared flat and distant. "My cousin Elaine kept saying how Patricia doesn't have the Campbell chin. You know, that cleft that runs in my family. My dad has it, I have it, my brother has it." I laughed, but it came out strangled. "That's what this is about. A chin." James shook his head slowly, deliberately, as if I was missing something obvious. "It's not just the chin, Mary. I don't know, it's everything. I look at her sometimes and I don't see myself. At all." The weight of his words settled between us, heavy and suffocating. Outside, our neighbor's sprinkler system clicked on, water hissing against the fence we shared. "You've never mentioned any doubts before." "Not once in 13 years. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Too high, too defensive. "Because I never let myself think about it," James replied, abandoning the laundry altogether and sitting back on the couch. His shoulders slumped forward slightly. "But lately I can't stop noticing the differences. She doesn't have my eyes, my nose, my anything." "She has my eyes," I said automatically. "And her own nose, thank goodness. Yours would be too big for her face." The joke fell flat, crashing in the tension-filled room. I thought back to Patricia's birth, to the overwhelming joy that had filled that hospital room. James had cried, actual tears, the first time he held her. "She's perfect," he'd whispered, counting her tiny fingers and toes. Not once in that moment had he looked for the Campbell chin. "Why now?" I asked, the question scraping my throat. "After 13 years, why are you questioning this now?" James ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture I'd watched 1,000 times before. "I don't know, Mary. Maybe it's always been there, this doubt just below the surface. But when Cousin Elaine said it so bluntly and everyone nodded like they'd all been thinking it too, it was like something cracked open inside me." The piano music from the other room stopped abruptly. Patricia called out, "Mom? Did you wash my blue hoodie? I need it for tomorrow." "Check the dryer, honey." I called back, struggling to keep my voice steady. When I turned back to James, I saw he was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I've never been unfaithful," I said firmly, my hands balling into fists. "Never. Our marriage hadn't been perfect. What marriage is? We'd weathered job losses, the strain of infertility treatments before Patricia was conceived, my father's death, James's depression 3 years ago. But through it all, fidelity had never been a question. "I want to believe you," he said, and the fact that he phrased it that way, want to believe, not do believe, felt like a slap. "I've scheduled a DNA test," he continued, reaching for his phone on the coffee table. "Next Tuesday at Midtown Clinic. For all 3 of us." The laundry basket between us suddenly seemed like a canyon. I picked up a towel just to have something to do with my hands. You're serious? It wasn't a question. I need to know, Mary. His voice cracked slightly. I just need to know. I thought of Patricia in the next room, our bright, sensitive daughter who played piano and collected rocks and had her father's stubborn streak, even if she didn't have his chin. The daughter we'd conceived after 3 rounds of fertility treatments, when we'd almost given up hope. Fine, I said, the word tasting bitter. We'll do the test. And when it proves what I already know, I expect a serious apology. James nodded, relief visibly washing over him. He reached for my hand across the laundry basket, but I pulled back, returning to my sock matching with mechanical precision. That night, after Patricia went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while James slept beside me. His breathing was even, as if unburdened by the bomb he'd dropped hours earlier. I envied him that peace, however temporary. My mind raced backward, calculating dates, appointments, procedures from over 13 years ago. We'd used James's sperm for the intrauterine insemination that finally worked. There had been paperwork, consent forms, ID checks. How could there be any mistake? Yet now his doubt, was contagious. It crept into the crevices of my certainty, whispering questions I'd never considered. What if there had been some mix-up at the clinic? What if the tired-looking nurse had switched samples? What if? I turned onto my side, watching the red numbers of our alarm clock tick forward. 11:43, 11:44. Time marching relentlessly toward the DNA test that would either restore our family's foundation or crack it beyond repair. The next morning, James acted as if nothing had happened. He drank his coffee, kissed Patricia's forehead before she left for school, and grabbed his lunch from the refrigerator like it was any other Wednesday. But the careful way he avoided my eyes told me everything. Have a good day, I said automatically as he headed for the door. He paused, car keys jangling in his hand. You too, he replied, and then after a beat, I'm sorry about last night. I need to know. After he left, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of our life together. Patricia's science project spreading across half the surface, James's coffee mug with its ring of brown residue, the calendar where I'd meticulously recorded soccer practices and dentist appointments. Every object seemed to vibrate with a new, uncertain energy. I pulled out my laptop and typed DNA paternity testing into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. Home kits, legal tests, peace of mind tests. One website promised secrets revealed in 3 to 5 business days. As if life-altering revelations should arrive with the same convenience as an Amazon package. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Appointment confirmed for Tuesday at 2 p.m. Can you bring Patricia straight from school? I stared at the message, anger and hurt competing for dominance. How were we supposed to explain this to our daughter? Hey sweetie, Dad just wants to check if you're really his, no big deal? I typed back. What are we telling her? 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, Family Medical History Project? It's not entirely a lie. Not entirely a lie. Like our marriage wasn't entirely in crisis. Like I wasn't entirely shattered by his lack of trust. I agreed anyway because what choice did I have? The seed of doubt had been planted and nothing would root it out except the test results. That evening I watched Patricia and James during dinner with new eyes, searching for resemblances I'd always taken for granted. Patricia gesticulated wildly while describing a classroom drama, her hands moving in the same expansive way James's did when he was excited. They both tilted their heads slightly to the right when concentrating on something. They shared the same booming laugh that always seemed too big for their bodies. But then again, were those genetic traits or learned behaviors? After 13 years living together, how much of James had Patricia absorbed through simple proximity and imitation? Why are you staring at me? Patricia asked suddenly, fork halfway to her mouth. Do I have something on my face? I blinked, caught. Just thinking how grown-up you look these days. She rolled her eyes in that distinctly teenage way she'd recently perfected. Mom, you literally say that every day. Because every day it's more true, I replied, forcing a smile. Across the table, James watched our exchange silently, his own thoughts unreadable behind his glasses. When our eyes met briefly, I saw a flicker of something, regret? Fear? Before he looked away. That night, I dreamed of the day Patricia was born. In reality, it had been a relatively smooth delivery. 8 hours from first contraction to baby in arms, no complications. But in my dream, the hospital was a maze of identical corridors, and nurses kept wheeling babies past me, none of them mine. Dream James stood at a distance, watching but not helping, saying over and over, "We need to be sure, Mary. We need to be sure." I woke at 3 a.m. gasping, my pillow damp with sweat or tears or both. The days until Tuesday stretched endlessly. James and I moved around each other carefully, maintaining a facade of normalcy for Patricia's sake while barely speaking when we were alone. He slept on his side of the bed, I on mine, the middle ground between us untouched and cold. On Monday night, I found him in Patricia's room while she was showering, looking at the framed photos on her bookshelf. His fingers traced one image from her 5th birthday, Patricia grinning with a missing front tooth, chocolate cake smeared across her cheeks, James's arm around her small shoulders. "I remember that day," I said from the doorway. "You built her that dollhouse from scratch. Stayed up 3 nights in a row to finish it." He nodded without turning around. "I've been a good father to her," he said quietly. "Whatever the test shows." "You have," I agreed, and in that moment I felt the first hint of compassion breaking through my anger. Whatever demons drove him to question Patricia's paternity, he'd never let them affect how he treated her. "She adores you." Finally he faced me, his eyes red-rimmed behind his glasses. If it shows." He couldn't finish. "Then we'll deal with it," I said more firmly than I felt. "Together." Tuesday dawned bright and crisp, autumn asserting itself in the reddening maple outside our bedroom window. I dressed carefully, as if going into battle rather than to a medical clinic for a simple cheek swab. Patricia was suspicious when I picked her up early from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Is this really for a medical history project?" she asked as we drove toward the clinic where James would meet us. "Because Emma's family did one last year and they didn't have to go to a doctor. This is more comprehensive," I lied, hating myself for it. "And it's important to have accurate information." She shrugged, accepting this with the easy trust of a child who's never had reason to doubt her parents. The trust one hoped we weren't about to shatter. James was already in the waiting room when we arrived, nodding at me over Patricia's head as she hugged him hello. The receptionist handed us clipboards with consent forms, and my hand trembled slightly as I signed mine. "Will it hurt?" Patricia asked the nurse who led us into an examination room. "Not a bit," the woman assured her. "Just a quick swab inside your cheek and you're done." It was over in minutes. 3 cotton swabs in 3 labeled tubes, our family's truth sealed away to be revealed in sterile laboratory conditions. The nurse explained the results would be available in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days of uncertainty. Of walking on eggshells. Of wondering if the life we'd built was founded on solid ground or shifting sand. As we left the clinic, Patricia skipped ahead to the car, already focused on getting back to school for her final classes. James and I followed more slowly, the weight of what we'd just done hanging between us. "No matter what," I said quietly, "she's our daughter." "Ours." James nodded, keys clutched tightly in his hand. "I know," he said, but I couldn't tell if he meant it, or if he was just saying what he thought I needed to hear. The waiting began. 2 weeks stretched before us like an endless desert, each grain of sand a minute that needed to be endured. James and I had created an unspoken system of carefully coordinated movements around the house, like dancers avoiding collision on a crowded stage. We made small talk about work, about the weather, about Patricia's upcoming science fair project. Anything but the test. The morning after our clinic visit, I stood in our bathroom staring at my reflection. Had I aged overnight? The lines around my eyes seemed deeper, more pronounced. My hair, usually carefully styled, hung limp around my face. I applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes, evidence of another sleepless night. "Mom, have you seen my math notebook?" Patricia's voice jolted me from my scrutiny. I cleared my throat. "Check under the couch cushions. That's where it was last time." Patricia appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, navy blue skirt, white button-up, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. At 13 she teetered on the edge of childhood and adolescence, her limbs suddenly too long for her body, her expressions cycling between childlike enthusiasm and teenage cynicism. "Are you okay?" she asked, studying me with those perceptive blue eyes. My eyes. Just tired, I replied, forcing a smile. Big project at work. She nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Dad's making pancakes. He seems weird too. Before I could respond, she was gone, thundering down the stairs with the boundless energy of youth. I finished applying my makeup with trembling hands. How long could we maintain this charade? How long before Patricia sensed the seismic shift occurring beneath our family's foundation? Downstairs, James stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. The kitchen smelled of butter and maple syrup, a normal Tuesday morning scent that now felt jarringly out of place. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning," I replied, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd already brewed. Patricia sat at the island counter, her math notebook indeed rescued from between the couch cushions, scribbling last-minute homework answers. "Dad's pancakes are weird today," she announced. James frowned. "What's wrong with them?" "They taste, I don't know, different." She shrugged, drowning another bite in syrup. I took a small bite from her plate. They tasted exactly the same as always. James had been making this recipe since before Patricia was born. "Seems normal to me," I said. Patricia rolled her eyes. "Everything tastes different lately. Miss Harrison says it's because I'm growing." James and I exchanged a glance, our first moment of real connection in days. Were we both thinking the same thing? That soon, everything might truly be different? The days crawled by. At work, I stared at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers, my mind constantly drifting to the test. The question James had planted spread its roots, invading every quiet moment. During my lunch break, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Patricia as a newborn, as a toddler, as a kindergartner. In every image I searched for James's features, suddenly unsure if what I'd always seen was real or imagined. At night, I'd wake from dreams where Patricia was disappearing, fading like a photograph left in the sun, while James and I frantically tried to hold on to her. I'd reach across the bed for him, seeking comfort, only to pull back at the last moment, remembering the wall that now stood between us. 5 days after the test, I found a notification on my phone, an email from the clinic. My heart nearly stopped until I realized it was just a standard survey about our experience. Still, seeing the clinic's name triggered a wave of nausea so intense I had to sit down at my desk, breathing deeply until it passed. That evening, James broke our silent truce. "Have you heard anything?" he asked as we cleaned up after dinner, Patricia upstairs working on homework. "No," I said, scrubbing unnecessarily hard at a pot that was already clean. "They said 2 weeks." He nodded, drying a plate with careful attention. "I keep checking my phone. I know it's too early, but you can't help it," I finished. Despite my anger, I understood that urgency, that need to know. "Yeah." He set the plate down and leaned against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. "Mary, what if?" "Don't," I cut him off. "Let's not play the what if game. Not until we know something for sure." He nodded again, accepting this boundary. After a moment he said, "I noticed Patricia's grades slipped in math. Did you see the test she brought home yesterday?" It was so normal, so parental, this concern about grades. For a moment we were just us again. Mom and Dad discussing their child's education. "She's struggling with fractions." I said I'd help her this weekend. "Good," he said. "That's good." We stood in the kitchen, the distance between us simultaneously vast and microscopic. He took a step toward me, hesitated, then continued past to put away the dried dishes. Whatever moment might have occurred dissolved before it could form. 8 days after the test, Patricia asked to have Emma, her best friend since 3rd grade, over for a sleepover. James and I exchanged worried glances across the dinner table. Could we maintain our facade with an observant 13-year-old guest? "Please," Patricia begged. "Emma's mom already said it's okay." "Sure," I heard myself say. "Friday night works." Later, James confronted me in our bedroom. "A sleepover? No. With everything that's..." What was I supposed to say? I interrupted. "Sorry, honey, we can't have your friend over because Dad and I are waiting to find out if he's really your father." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, James." I sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "But we can't put Patricia's life on hold while we wait. She hasn't done anything wrong." He sat beside me, careful to maintain several inches of space between us. "You're right," he conceded. I can't focus on anything else. At work, at home, it's all I think about." "Me too," I admitted. The confession hung in the air between us, a small bridge across the growing chasm. Friday night arrived, and with it Emma, a lanky girl with braces and an infectious laugh. The girls immediately retreated to Patricia's room, giggling about boys and the latest TikTok trends. James ordered pizza, I made popcorn, and for a few hours the sound of teenage laughter filled our home, pushing back the shadows of doubt. After the girls finally fell asleep around midnight, I found James in the living room, scrolling through his phone. The blue light cast eerie shadows across his face. "Anything?" I asked, knowing he was checking his email again. He shook his head. "Nothing." I sat in the armchair across from him, drawing my knees up to my chest. "What are you hoping for?" I asked suddenly. "With the results, I mean." James looked up, startled by the directness of my question. He set his phone down, considering. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "When I first had the doubt, I thought I wanted confirmation that she's mine. But now." He trailed off. "Now?" I prompted. "Now I'm just scared," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "Because whatever the result is, something changes. Either I've spent weeks doubting you for no reason, hurting you, hurting us, or Patricia isn't biologically yours," I finished when he couldn't. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "But she's still mine," he said fiercely. "No matter what some test says. I've been her dad for 13 years. That doesn't just disappear." It was the first time since this began that I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for the test results, but for us, for our ability to navigate whatever came next. The next morning, Emma's mother picked her up early for a dentist appointment. Patricia moped around the house afterward, complaining of boredom until James suggested they go to the batting cages, their special activity since she joined softball in 4th grade. While they were gone, I tackled the mountain of laundry that had accumulated during our emotional limbo. As I sorted whites from colors, I found one of James's t-shirts, the faded gray one he'd had since college. Without thinking, I brought it to my face, inhaling the familiar scent of him. Tears sprang to my eyes unexpectedly, grief for what we'd lost. The easy trust, the unquestioned certainty of our family. 12 days after the test, my phone rang while I was grocery shopping. The clinic's number flashed on the screen. My heart leaped into my throat as I abandoned my half-filled cart in the cereal aisle and stepped outside to take the call. "Mrs. Campbell? This is Dr. Reynolds from Midtown Clinic." "Yes." My voice sounded strangled. "We have the results from your family's DNA test. I was wondering if you could come in to discuss them." Is something wrong?" I leaned against the brick wall of the store, suddenly dizzy. There was a pause on the other end. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person, Mrs. Campbell. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for you?" "All of us. My husband and daughter too." Another pause. "Actually, I'd like to speak with you alone first, if that's possible." Ice water seemed to replace the blood in my veins. "Why?" I whispered, though I already knew there could only be one reason. The results showed something Dr. Reynolds didn't want to discuss in front of James or Patricia. "It's standard procedure for results like these," she said carefully. "Nothing to be alarmed about." But I was alarmed. Terrified. "Tomorrow at 2 is fine," I managed to say. "Mrs. Campbell?" Dr. Reynolds's voice had softened. "Try not to worry too much before we talk." I hung up and stared blindly at the parking lot, unseeing. My abandoned groceries, the drive home, the mechanical preparation of dinner. It all happened in a fog. James noted my distraction but didn't press when I blamed it on work stress. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. Should I tell him about the appointment? It seemed cruel to make him wait another day when I would know sooner. But something held me back. Perhaps self-preservation, perhaps intuition. The next day dragged endlessly. I called in sick to work, unable to face colleagues, unable to pretend everything was normal. James left early for a meeting, kissing Patricia goodbye at the door, giving me a questioning look that I avoided by busying myself with the coffee maker. When it was time to leave for the clinic, I stood in our bedroom, staring at my reflection again. 2 weeks had etched new lines in my face, darkened the circles under my eyes. Whatever news awaited me would either erase those lines or deepen them permanently. The clinic waiting room was half empty when I arrived. A pregnant woman thumbed through a magazine, an elderly man dozed in a corner chair, a mother soothed a fussy infant. Normal people with normal medical concerns. How I envied them. Mrs. Campbell? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Reynolds will see you now. I followed her down a sterile hallway to a small office where Dr. Reynolds, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, stood to greet me. Thank you for coming in, she said, gesturing for me to sit. I know this must be a stressful time. Do you have the results? I asked, unable to bear another moment of uncertainty. Dr. Reynolds nodded, opening a folder on her desk. Yes, I do. She looked at me directly, her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Campbell, the paternity test shows that your husband, James Campbell, is not the biological father of your daughter, Patricia. Despite having feared exactly this outcome, hearing the words spoken aloud felt like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair, steadying myself. However, Dr. Reynolds continued, there's something else you should know. Something unusual that appeared in both your and your husband's results. She leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Campbell, there's something you should know about both of you. Both of us. I repeated, my voice hollow. The small office seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing closer. What do you mean? Dr. Reynolds removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the folder in front of her. The lab that processed your family's DNA samples uses a comprehensive genetic analysis that looks at more markers than a standard paternity test. It's what allows us to provide more detailed health information. She paused, choosing her words deliberately. During this analysis, they noticed some unusual patterns. My mouth went dry. What kind of patterns? Mrs. Campbell, are you familiar with the concept of genetic chimerism? I shook my head, the unfamiliar term floating between us like an uninvited guest. It's a rare condition where a person has two different sets of DNA in their body, she explained, her tone shifting to a more clinical register. It can happen when twin embryos fuse very early in development. The result is one person with two distinct genetic profiles. I don't understand what this has to do with our test results, I said, gripping the edge of her desk. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward slightly. The lab detected signs consistent with chimerism in your husband's sample. It appears Mr. Campbell may have two distinct genetic profiles. One set of his DNA doesn't match Patricia's, but, she paused meaningfully, there's evidence suggesting another set might. The room tilted slightly. I blinked, trying to process this information that simultaneously made no sense and yet explained everything. Are you saying James might be Patricia's father after all? Just, through some different DNA he has. It's a possibility we need to explore further, she confirmed. Chimerism can sometimes explain cases where a parent appears unrelated to their biological child through standard testing. Hope flickered like a distant lighthouse. So we need more tests? Yes. We'd need specialized testing to confirm chimerism and determine if your husband's second genetic profile is a match for Patricia. She hesitated. But there's something else, Mrs. Campbell. The hope dimmed. What? We found another genetic anomaly in the results. You and your husband appear to share an unusually high number of genetic markers for unrelated individuals. It's the kind of similarity we might see between distant relatives. The words hit me with physical force. James and I are related? Distantly, she emphasized. Perhaps third or fourth cousins. It's not uncommon in populations with shared geographical ancestry. Many couples have some distant genetic connection without realizing it. My head spun with this cascade of revelations. James might be Patricia's father through some alternate DNA he carried. James and I might be distant cousins. Nothing was as simple as it had seemed 2 weeks ago. What happens now? I asked weakly. I'd recommend specialized genetic counseling for your family. We have an excellent team at Lansing Memorial who can coordinate the additional testing and help you understand the implications. She scribbled on a prescription pad and handed me a name and number. Dr. Winters is our top genetic specialist. I've already spoken with her about your case. I stared at the paper, the letters swimming before my eyes. Should I tell my husband right away? And Patricia, what do we tell her? Dr. Reynolds's expression softened. That's entirely your decision, Mrs. Campbell. Some parents prefer to wait for conclusive results before discussing these matters with their children. As for your husband. She hesitated. In my experience, honesty is usually the best policy between spouses, but I understand this is complicated. An understatement if I'd ever heard one. I left the clinic in a fog, Dr. Winter's contact information clutched in my hand like a talisman. The mid-afternoon sun seemed too bright, the parking lot too loud with its slamming doors and rumbling engines. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, unable to turn the key in the ignition, unable to begin the journey home that would force me to decide what to tell James. Chimerism. The word felt strange in my mind. I pulled out my phone and searched for it, reading hungrily as website after website described this rare condition where a person carried two sets of DNA. There were cases of mothers failing paternity tests for their own biological children, cases of organ transplants complicated by mixed genetic profiles, cases of people discovering their dual genetic nature only through random testing. Could this explain everything? The Campbell chin that Patricia didn't inherit? The subtle differences James had finally allowed himself to notice? And what about the other revelation, that James and I shared distant ancestry? Was it mere coincidence, or was there some forgotten family connection neither of us knew about? I finally started the car and drove home slowly, rehearsing explanations in my head, discarding each one as inadequate. How do you tell your husband that he might be your distant cousin? That he might have absorbed his twin in the womb? That these bizarre biological facts might actually prove he was Patricia's father all along? Our house looked painfully normal when I pulled into the driveway. James's car wasn't there yet, but Patricia's backpack lay discarded on the front steps, evidence she'd come home from school. I gathered my courage and went inside. "Mom." Patricia called from the kitchen. "Is that you?" "Yes, honey," I answered, trying to infuse my voice with a normalcy I didn't feel. She appeared in the hallway, a peanut butter sandwich in one hand. "You weren't here when I got home. Dad texted that he's working late." Of course he was. The universe was giving me a few more hours to decide what to do with my new knowledge. "Sorry, sweetie. I had an appointment." Not technically a lie. Patricia shrugged, the casual indifference of a teenager who had momentarily finished cataloging the sins of her parents. "It's fine. Emma invited me over to study for the history test. Can I go?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep her close, as if these genetic revelations might somehow cause her to vanish if she left my sight. But then reason reasserted itself. Nothing had changed about Patricia. She was still the same girl she'd been this morning. "Sure," I said. "Be home by 8. After she left, I paced the house restlessly, moving from room to room as if searching for something without knowing what. In Patricia's bedroom, I studied the photos on her bulletin board. Patricia and Emma making silly faces at the mall. Patricia with her softball team. Patricia and James at the father-daughter dance last year, his arm around her shoulders, both beaming at the camera. Then I found myself in our home office, pulling out the fireproof box where we kept important documents. Birth certificates, social security cards, insurance policies. I found Patricia's birth certificate, studying it as if it might contain new answers. Mother: Mary Elizabeth Campbell. Father: James Thomas Campbell. On paper it was so simple. In reality nothing was simple anymore. The sound of James's car in the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I hastily returned everything to the box and went downstairs, still no closer to deciding what to tell him. "Mary," James called as he entered. "You home?" "In the kitchen," I answered, busying myself at the sink to hide my shaking hands. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, eyes tired. "Hey. Long day." "Yeah," I agreed, unable to meet his gaze. "Patricia's at Emma's. She'll be back by 8. He nodded, setting his laptop bag on the counter. After a moment of awkward silence he asked, "Any word from the clinic?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment to tell him, to share what Dr. Reynolds had told me. Instead I heard myself say, "Not yet." The lie tasted bitter. I had never lied to James before, not about anything important. But I needed time to process everything myself, to understand the implications before I tried to explain them to him. "It's been exactly 2 weeks, he said, frustration evident in his voice. "They said results would be ready by now." "Maybe tomorrow," I murmured, turning away to open the refrigerator, hiding my face from his scrutiny. That night, after a stilted dinner and an evening of carefully avoiding meaningful conversation, I lay beside James in bed, listening to his breathing, wondering if somewhere inside him was the genetic echo of a twin who had never been born. I woke before dawn, my decision made. I couldn't tell James about the chimerism possibility without proper understanding. I needed to speak with Dr. Winters first, to get clarity about what these results truly meant. Only then could I explain everything to James in a way that wouldn't further fracture our already strained relationship. After James left for work and Patricia for school, I called the number Dr. Reynolds had given me. Dr. Winters's receptionist sounded unsurprised by my call, as if they received calls about genetic anomalies every day. Perhaps they did. Dr. Winters had a cancellation this afternoon at 2, the woman informed me. She could see you then. I'll take it, I said immediately. The Genetic Counseling Center occupied the 3rd floor of a modern medical building near the university. The waiting room was painted in soothing blues and greens, with educational posters about DNA and heredity lining the walls. I sat rigidly in a plush chair, surrounded by pregnant women and elderly couples, wondering what genetic puzzles had brought them here. Dr. Winters was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a direct gaze and quick smile. Her office was cluttered with books and journals, a stark contrast to Dr. Reynolds's minimalist space. "Mrs. Campbell," she greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. "Dr. Reynolds briefed me on your situation. I understand this must be overwhelming." "Completely," I admitted, sinking into the chair across from her desk. "I don't even know where to begin with questions." "Let's start with chimerism," she suggested, pulling a diagram from a folder. "It's more common than people realize, though often undetected unless specific genetic testing is done." For the next 45 minutes, Dr. Winters walked me through the science with patient clarity. She explained how James could have 2 distinct DNA profiles if he had absorbed a twin embryo in the earliest stages of development. How certain tissues might contain one DNA profile, while others contained another. How standard paternity tests might miss this complexity. So it's possible James is Patricia's biological father through this chimeric DNA? I asked, clinging to this possibility. "It's one explanation," she confirmed. "Not the only one, but it fits the preliminary data. We'll need cheek swabs, blood samples, and possibly even skin biopsies from different parts of your husband's body to confirm." The thought of explaining this to James made my stomach clench. "And what about the other thing, about James and me potentially being related?" Dr. Winters nodded, pulling up another file on her computer. "The genetic overlap you share is consistent with 3rd or 4th cousins. It's not close enough to raise any medical concerns for your daughter, if that's what you're worried about." It hadn't been, but the reassurance was welcome nonetheless. "The question is," Dr. Winters continued, "do you know of any family connection? Any chance your ancestors came from the same region?" I shook my head slowly, then stopped. "Actually, James's family is from northern Michigan originally. Miners who came over from Cornwall in the 1880s. My great-grandfather was from that area too, though my grandmother always said he was of Irish descent." Dr. Winters smiled. "Small communities in the 19th century often had considerable intermarriage. It wouldn't be surprising if you share some distant ancestry." She gave me informational pamphlets on chimerism and genetic counseling, along with a lab requisition for the additional testing James would need. "Mrs. Campbell," she said as I gathered my things to leave, "one more thing. These results don't change who your family is. Genetics is just one piece of a much larger puzzle." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you." On the drive home, I rehearsed explanations again, searching for words that could make the incomprehensible clear. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had decided I would tell James everything tonight. No more secrets, no more lies. But when I opened the front door, I found James sitting at the kitchen table, his expression thunderous, a familiar-looking folder open before him. "The clinic called," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They wanted to confirm our appointment with Dr. Winters tomorrow." Imagine my surprise when they mentioned you'd already seen her today. The carefully crafted explanation dissolved on my tongue. "James, I can explain." "You've had the results," he interrupted, his voice tight with controlled fury. "And you didn't tell me." I moved slowly into the kitchen, setting my purse and the pamphlets on the counter. "Yes," I admitted. "I got a call yesterday. But it's not what you think." "What is it then?" he demanded. "Am I Patricia's father or not?" I took a deep breath, meeting his angry gaze directly. The answer isn't simple. There's something unusual in your DNA, James. Something that might explain everything. James stared at me, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. Something unusual in my DNA? What are you talking about? I slid into the chair across from him, pushing aside the stack of mail that perpetually collected on our kitchen table. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? The doctor called me in yesterday to explain that the test showed you're not Patricia's biological father. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. But there's more to it. They found evidence that you might have a condition called chimerism. His brow furrowed. Chimerism. It means you might have two different sets of DNA in your body, I explained, echoing Dr. Winters's words. It's rare, but it happens when twin embryos fuse very early in development. One person, two genetic profiles. James leaned back in his chair, processing. And this relates to Patricia how? The test that showed you're not her father only tested one set of your DNA. The doctors think it's possible your other DNA profile might match hers. I reached for his hand across the table, but he pulled back slightly. James, you could still be her biological father, just in a way science has trouble detecting. He stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. This sounds like science fiction, Mary. Like you're grasping at some far-fetched explanation. I thought so too, I admitted. But it's real. Dr. Winters gave me articles about it, cases where it's happened to other families. I retrieved the pamphlets from the counter and placed them on the table. There's more testing they want to do, blood samples, skin biopsies from different parts of your body, to see if they can find the other DNA. James picked up one of the pamphlets, scanning it with the focused expression he wore when reviewing contracts at work. And you believed this enough to make an appointment without telling me? The accusation stung, but it was fair. I was trying to understand it first, I said quietly. I wanted to be able to explain it to you properly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you right away. He sighed heavily, setting the pamphlet down. Is there anything else you're not telling me? I hesitated, weighing whether to share the second revelation. But I'd promised myself no more secrets. Yes, I admitted. The test also showed that you and I might be distantly related. Third or fourth cousins most likely. James stared at me in disbelief. You're joking. I wish I were. Dr. Winters thinks it's probably because both our families came from northern Michigan originally. Small communities, limited gene pools. He sank back into his chair, running both hands through his hair. So I might have absorbed my twin in the womb and you might be my cousin. That's a lot. I know, I said softly. The front door opened, followed by the sound of Patricia's backpack hitting the floor. I'm home, she called. James and I exchanged a panicked glance. We'll continue this later, he muttered, quickly gathering the pamphlets as Patricia bounded into the kitchen. Hey, Emma's mom made chocolate chip cookies. I brought you guys some. She placed a napkin-wrapped bundle on the table, then looked between us, her smile faltering. What's wrong? You both look weird. Nothing's wrong, I said too quickly. Dad and I were just discussing some health insurance paperwork. Patricia rolled her eyes. Boring adult stuff. Got it. She grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. I'm going to start my science project. Don't disturb me unless the house is on fire. After she disappeared upstairs, James and I exhaled simultaneously. We need to decide what to tell her, I said. And when? James nodded, his anger seemingly replaced by exhaustion. Let's get the additional testing done first. No sense worrying her until we know more. Later that night, after Patricia had gone to bed, James found me in our home office where I'd been researching chimerism online. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I want to understand more about this, he said. Start from the beginning. I closed my laptop and turned to face him fully. What do you want to know? Everything. How common is this? How did the doctors even think to look for it? And most importantly, what are the chances it explains Patricia's paternity? For the next hour, I shared everything Dr. Winters had told me about chimerism, how it wasn't as rare as once thought, how it was often discovered only through unexplained paternity test results, how specialized testing could potentially identify James's second genetic profile. So tomorrow, I concluded, we go together to meet Dr. Winters and schedule the additional tests. James nodded slowly. And we don't tell Patricia anything yet. Not until we know more, I agreed. He studied me for a long moment. When I first started having doubts, I never imagined it would lead to this. I thought either you'd been unfaithful or there'd been some mix-up at the fertility clinic. I never considered. He gestured vaguely. All this. Me neither, I admitted. I was so hurt that you'd question Patricia's paternity at all. Now I'm just... I searched for the right word. Confused. Overwhelmed. Yeah. James rubbed his eyes tiredly. Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay awake listening to James's breathing beside me, wondering if somewhere inside him was the genetic memory of a twin who had never been born. Wondering if that twin, absorbed before either was truly formed, might be the biological connection to our daughter. The universe's strangest, most miraculous loophole. The appointment with Dr. Winters the next day was a blur of medical terminology and testing protocols. James would need to provide multiple samples: cheek swabs from both sides of his mouth, blood drawn from both arms, skin biopsies from his back and chest. The comprehensive genetic analysis would take nearly 3 weeks. 3 more weeks of limbo, James said grimly as we left the clinic. I squeezed his hand. At least now we're in it together. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. We went to work, helped Patricia with homework, made dinner, watched TV. All the normal rhythms of family life continued on the surface while underneath the foundation shifted. 1 week after our appointment with Dr. Winters, I was grocery shopping when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Campbell? This is Thomas Miller from the fertility clinic where you received treatment 14 years ago. My heart skipped. The fertility clinic that had helped us conceive Patricia had closed 5 years ago. Yes. How can I help you? I'm calling because your name came up in a review of our old records. There's some information that might be relevant to you, particularly in light of the genetic testing your family is currently undergoing. I gripped my shopping cart for support. How do you know about our testing? Dr. Winters contacted us as part of her investigation. Patient confidentiality allows for medical record exchanges in cases like yours. I abandoned my cart for the second time in as many weeks, stepping outside to focus on the call. What information? I'd prefer to discuss this in person if possible. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? Another person requesting an in-person meeting to deliver potentially life-altering news. Yes, I agreed, but I'd like my husband to be there as well. Of course, he said. Shall we say 10 a.m. at my office? That evening I told James about the call. What do you think they found? He asked, his voice tight with anxiety. I don't know. But if they're reaching out after all this time, it must be significant. We both struggled to sleep that night, the possibility of yet another revelation hanging over us. The next morning, after dropping Patricia at school, we drove to the address Thomas Miller had provided. A modern office building in downtown Lansing that housed various medical practices. His office was small but well-appointed, with certificates on the walls indicating his specialization in reproductive medicine. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell. He greeted us, shaking our hands. Thank you for coming in. Please have a seat. We sat side by side on a small leather couch, instinctively drawing closer together despite the strain of recent weeks. As I mentioned on the phone, Thomas began, I was reviewing records from Lakeview Fertility Clinic, where I was a junior physician at the time of your treatment. When Dr. Winters contacted us about potential chimerism in your case, I conducted a thorough search of our archived files. He opened a folder on his desk. According to our records, you underwent intrauterine insemination using your husband's sperm sample on March 3, 2011. That's right, I confirmed. What I discovered, he continued, is that there was another patient with a very similar name to your husband's who provided a sperm sample on the same day. James and I exchanged glances. Who? James asked, though I suddenly knew the answer before Thomas spoke. A Thomas Campbell, he said, looking directly at James. Your brother, I presume? James's face paled. My twin brother, he corrected automatically. But that's impossible. Thomas and I weren't speaking back then. We hadn't seen each other in years. Why would he be at the same fertility clinic? Thomas Miller checked his notes. According to our records, he was donating sperm anonymously that day. It appears that in the lab, there may have been confusion between James Campbell and Thomas Campbell, especially since they were both in the system on the same date. My mind raced back 14 years, to the small waiting room where James had given his sample while I nervously thumbed through magazines. Had Thomas been there too? Had we narrowly missed crossing paths? Are you saying? I couldn't finish the question. Thomas nodded gravely. We believe there may have been a mix-up. That Patricia may have been conceived using Thomas Campbell's sperm rather than James's. James stood abruptly, pacing the small office. This is unbelievable. First chimerism, now a sample mix-up? What's next? Alien abduction. I understand this is difficult, Thomas said calmly. But it would explain why the paternity test showed no match between you and Patricia. It would also be consistent with the genetic similarity you share with your daughter, given that you and your twin brother would have very similar DNA. But not identical, James said. We're fraternal twins, not identical. Still, as brothers, you share approximately 50% of your DNA, Thomas explained. Which is why Patricia likely resembles you in many ways, despite the genetic test results. I felt oddly detached, as if watching this scene from a distance. So that's it? Mystery solved? Patricia is biologically Thomas's daughter, not James's. Thomas hesitated. It's a strong possibility but not confirmed. The chimerism testing should continue, as that remains another potential explanation. And what happens now? James demanded. You just drop this bomb on us and expect us to deal with it? The clinic would like to offer genetic counseling services and support. The clinic that mixed up our samples? James interrupted bitterly. No thanks. I placed a hand on his arm. James, I said quietly. This isn't his fault. He's trying to help. James took a deep breath, visibly struggling for control. I need to know one thing, he said finally. Does my brother know about this? Thomas shook his head. No. Patient confidentiality prevents us from contacting him without his permission. But given the circumstances, he might be the biological father of our child, James finished. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we pulled into our driveway that James finally spoke. I need to contact Thomas, he said quietly. I turned to him surprised. After 14 years of not speaking, if there's even a chance he's Patricia's biological father, he has a right to know. And what about Patricia? I asked. What do we tell her? James leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. Nothing yet. Not until we know for sure. Finding Thomas proved easier than expected. A quick social media search revealed he was living in Grand Rapids, only an hour and a half away, working as an architect. His profile picture showed a bearded man with James's eyes and a more angular version of the Campbell chin. Should I message him? James asked that evening, staring at his brother's profile on his laptop screen. Or just call? After 14 years, a call might be too abrupt, I suggested. Maybe a message asking to meet? James nodded and began typing. I watched over his shoulder as he composed a deliberately vague message. Thomas, it's been a long time. I'm reaching out because there's an important family matter we need to discuss. Would you be willing to meet? James. He hit send before he could reconsider, and we both stared at the screen as if expecting an immediate response. He probably won't even see it right away, I said after a minute of silence. These things can take. A notification sound interrupted me. Message seen. 3 dots appeared, indicating Thomas was typing a response. James and I held our breath. James. This is unexpected. I'm in Lansing this weekend for a project consultation. Coffee at Brood Awakening Saturday 10 a.m.? James looked at me questioningly. I nodded encouragingly. See you there, he typed back. I should go alone, James said after the message was sent. At least initially. I wanted to protest but realized he was right. This reunion, complicated by our genetic puzzle, was something the brothers needed to navigate first. Hey, I agreed. But promise you'll call me right after. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Patricia was at a friend's house for a sleepover, blissfully unaware of the family drama unfolding around her. I paced our house as James dressed for his meeting with Thomas, checking his phone repeatedly for any cancellation message. What if he doesn't show up? James worried, adjusting his collar unnecessarily. He'll be there, I assured him, though I had no basis for such confidence. James left at 9:30 and I resumed my pacing, unable to focus on anything else. At 10:15 my phone rang, our neighbor Diane. Mary? I just saw James at Brood Awakening sitting with a man who looks exactly like him. Is that his brother? I thought they weren't speaking. News traveled fast in our neighborhood. Yes, that's Thomas, I confirmed. They're reconnecting. Well, that's wonderful, Diane gushed. Family should stick together, don't you think? If only she knew how complicated family had become. At 11:45, I heard James's car pull into the driveway. I met him at the door, searching his face for clues. He looked exhausted but somehow lighter. How did it go? I asked anxiously. James hung his jacket on the hook by the door. He agreed to take a DNA test, he said simply. You told him everything? James nodded, moving past me to sink onto the couch. Everything. The paternity test, the possible chimerism, the fertility clinic mix-up. He was shocked, obviously. And he remembered being at the clinic that day. Said he donated sperm several times during that period for extra money. He was between jobs, struggling. James ran a hand over his face. He never imagined it might have been used to conceive his niece. How do you feel? I asked, sitting beside him. James was quiet for a long moment. Confused. Angry. Relieved in a way. At least now we have an explanation that makes sense, even if it's not the one we wanted. What happens next? Thomas is coming over tomorrow, James said. He wants to meet Patricia. My stomach twisted with anxiety. But we haven't told her anything yet. Not as her potential biological father, James clarified quickly. Just as her uncle. My long-estranged brother who's back in my life. I hesitated. Is that fair to her? To either of them? Fair. James laughed bitterly. None of this is fair, Mary. But we have to start somewhere. And I hope, this is the right first step. That night we told Patricia that her Uncle Thomas would be visiting the next day. I have an uncle? She asked, looking up from her phone with genuine surprise. How come I've never met him? Your dad and he had a falling out a long time ago, I explained carefully. But they're working on reconnecting now. Patricia considered this. What was the fight about? James and I exchanged glances. It was complicated, James said after a pause. Adult stuff. That's what you always say when you don't want to tell me something, Patricia complained but let it drop. What's he like? James smiled faintly. He's an architect. Designs buildings. And he's a lot like me in some ways. Different in others. Does he have the Campbell chin? Patricia asked innocently. James froze for a split second before replying. Yes, he said quietly. He does. Sunday morning arrived with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. I woke early, finding myself alone in bed. The sound of soft movements in the kitchen told me James was already up. I found him making pancakes, his go-to comfort food, the same recipe his mother had taught him when he was 12. The familiar smell of butter and vanilla filled our kitchen. Couldn't sleep? I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd already brewed. James shook his head, flipping a perfectly golden pancake. Been up since 4. Figured I might as well make breakfast. I leaned against the counter, studying his profile. The harsh morning light accentuated the lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past month. Are you ready for today? No, he admitted, pouring more batter onto the griddle. But it needs to happen. Thomas was due at 11. Patricia, oblivious to the significance of this family reunion, had spent the morning in her room, alternating between homework and texting friends. Around 10:30 she finally emerged, dressed in jeans and her favorite blue sweater. So this uncle, she said, stealing a pancake from the stack James had been building. Is he cool or weird? James smiled faintly. A bit of both, probably. Like Dad, I added, trying to keep things light. It runs in the family. Patricia narrowed her eyes, studying us. You guys are acting strange. Is this a bigger deal than you're saying? Before we could respond, the doorbell rang. Earlier than expected. James froze, spatula in hand, a look of panic flashing across his face. I'll get it, I said, squeezing his arm as I passed. I opened the front door to find a man who was both achingly familiar and completely strange. Thomas had James's height and build, the same hazel eyes, but his face was leaner, his hair darker and longer, the infamous Campbell chin perhaps slightly more pronounced. He wore jeans and a gray button-down, and he gripped a small gift bag like a lifeline. "Mary," he said, his voice similar to James's but with a slightly different cadence. "It's been a long time." I realized with a start that I'd met Thomas before 14 years ago, in the earliest days of my relationship with James. Before the twins' estrangement. The memory was hazy. A family dinner, Thomas quieter than his brother, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. "Thomas," I replied, finding my voice. "Please come in." He hesitated at the threshold as if crossing it would commit him to something irreversible. Perhaps it would. "James is in the kitchen," I added, stepping aside. "And Patricia is eager to meet you." At his niece's name, Thomas's expression shifted, a flash of something. Wonder? Fear? Crossing his features before he composed himself and stepped inside. The kitchen fell silent when we entered. James stood by the stove, Patricia perched on a counter stool. For a moment, no one moved as the twins regarded each other across the room. Mirror images separated by time and choices, and now, potentially, by the most intimate of biological connections. "Tommy," James said finally, using a nickname I'd never heard him say before. "Jamie," Thomas replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Patricia stared between them, her eyes wide. "Whoa," she breathed. "This is weird." Her innocent comment broke the tension. James laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Yeah, it is a bit weird, isn't it?" Thomas approached Patricia slowly, offering his hand. "You must be Patricia. I'm your Uncle Thomas." She shook his hand, studying his face with undisguised curiosity. "You guys look exactly the same except for the beard. Are you identical twins?" "Fraternal," both men said simultaneously, then glanced at each other. "But similar enough to confuse people," Thomas added. "Especially nurses at fertility clinics," James muttered under his breath, too quietly for Patricia to hear. I touched Patricia's shoulder. "Honey, why don't you take your uncle to the living room while I help your dad finish breakfast?" Once they were gone, James gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. "He looks exactly the same," he whispered. 14 years, and it's like no time has passed." I wrapped my arm around his waist, leaning into him. "Breathe," I reminded him. "We'll get through this. Together." Breakfast was a surreal affair. We sat around our dining table making careful small talk, Thomas asking Patricia about school, her answering with increasing animation as she warmed to this new uncle who seemed genuinely interested in her life. James and I exchanged glances across the table, silently communicating our anxiety, our uncertainty about what came next. After the meal, Patricia remembered homework she needed to finish, disappearing upstairs with promises to return soon. The three adults sat in awkward silence until Thomas finally spoke. "She's amazing," he said quietly. "You've done a wonderful job with her." "We have," James agreed, emphasizing the we slightly. Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "I'm not here to disrupt your family, James. I just want to know the truth. For all our sakes." "And after we know?" I asked. "What then?" Thomas looked down at his hands, strong and capable. An architect's hands, similar to James's contractor hands but with less calluses. "That depends on what we find out. And what you both want." "What I want," James said firmly, "is for Patricia to know she's loved and secure no matter what some test says." "On that we agree," Thomas replied. The conversation shifted to logistics. Thomas had already scheduled his DNA test for the following day. Results would take about a week. We agreed that until then we would maintain the status quo. Thomas would be introduced to Patricia simply as her long-lost uncle, nothing more. Before leaving, Thomas handed Patricia the gift bag he'd brought, a small architectural model kit. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said. "Your dad mentioned you like building things." Patricia's eyes lit up. "This is so cool. Thanks, Uncle Thomas." The simple title, Uncle Thomas, carried such weight in that moment. I saw both men flinch slightly, though Patricia noticed nothing amiss. After Thomas left, promising to stay in touch about the test results, Patricia cornered us in the kitchen. "I like him," she declared. "Why didn't you guys talk for so long?" James and I exchanged glances. "It's complicated," he began, using our standard deflection. But Patricia folded her arms, suddenly looking older than her 13 years. You always say that. I'm not a little kid anymore. I can handle complicated. James sighed, sitting at the kitchen table and gesturing for Patricia to join him. Your uncle and I had a disagreement a long time ago. About family obligations. This wasn't exactly a lie. The twins' estrangement had begun over their dying father's care, with James shouldering most of the burden while Thomas pursued his career in another state. That seems like a dumb reason to not talk for 14 years, Patricia observed. It was, James agreed. Sometimes adults hold on to things longer than they should. Patricia accepted this explanation, more interested in starting her new model kit than in ancient family history. As she gathered her supplies at the kitchen table, James retreated to our bedroom. I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a framed photo from our wedding day. Him in a tuxedo, me in my white dress, and Thomas standing beside him as best man. I'd almost forgotten he was there, James said without looking up. That we were close once. I sat beside him, the mattress dipping slightly under our combined weight. What happened with your father? It wasn't entirely Thomas's fault. I know that now. James set the photo down. But at the time it felt like betrayal. Like he was choosing his career over family. And now I wonder if I've wasted 14 years being angry over something that doesn't matter anymore. He met my eyes. Especially with everything else that's happening. The week that followed was strange. Thomas called twice, ostensibly to check on how Patricia liked the model kit, but really to establish a tentative connection to our family. James answered these calls with increasing ease, the rhythm of their conversation finding its old groove despite the years and circumstances between them. Meanwhile, Dr. Winters called with James's chimerism test results. Negative. There was no evidence of two distinct DNA profiles in his body. Whatever was happening with Patricia's paternity, it wasn't due to absorbed twin DNA. This left us with only one likely explanation: the fertility clinic mix-up. Thomas's DNA test would almost certainly confirm what we now suspected, that he, not James, was Patricia's biological father. What do we do if it's true? I asked James late one night, lying beside him in the darkness of our bedroom. Do we tell Patricia? I don't know, he admitted. She has a right to know her biological heritage. But I'm her father in every way that matters. Yes, you are, I agreed firmly. He turned to face me, his expression barely visible in the dimness. Would you have married him instead? If you'd met Thomas first? The question caught me off guard. What? Oh. I fell in love with you, James. Not your DNA. But if we're talking about mix-ups and accidents of fate. He trailed off. I propped myself up on one elbow. Listen to me. I chose you. I love you. Nothing about this situation changes that. 7 days after Thomas's DNA test, he called James, his voice tight. I got the results, he said. Can I come over tonight? James agreed, and we arranged for Patricia to have dinner at Emma's house, buying us time for an adult conversation before involving her. Thomas arrived carrying a sealed envelope. The three of us sat in our living room, the envelope on the coffee table between us like an unexploded device. I haven't opened it, Thomas said. I thought we should do it together. James nodded, reaching for the envelope with a steady hand that belied the turmoil I knew he felt. He tore it open, unfolded the paper inside, and scanned the contents silently. His face revealed nothing as he passed the paper to me. The clinical language was straightforward. The alleged father, Thomas Campbell, is not excluded as the biological father of the tested child, Patricia Campbell. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. I handed the paper to Thomas, who read it with a similar lack of expression. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. So it's true, he said quietly. I'm her biological father. Yes, James acknowledged, his voice flat. Silence stretched between the three of us, heavy with implications. What happens now? Thomas finally asked. James looked at him directly. Now we decide what's best for Patricia. She should know the truth, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not right away maybe. But eventually. Both men nodded in agreement. I don't want to replace you, James, Thomas said earnestly. You've been her father in every way that matters. And I'll continue to be, James said, a note of defiance in his voice. Of course, Thomas assured him. But maybe I could be part of her life too? Get to know her better. James was quiet for a long moment. As her uncle for now, he said finally. Until we figure out how to tell her the whole truth. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his expression. I can live with that. Over the next month, Thomas became a regular presence in our lives. Sunday dinners, occasional weeknight visits, even helping Patricia with a school project about architecture. She adored her newfound uncle, delighted by the attention and the connection to a branch of family she hadn't known existed. James watched these interactions with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy at seeing his daughter happy, fear of losing his place in her heart, and a gradual rekindling of brotherhood with Thomas. The twins' relationship, dormant for 14 years, began to heal, cautiously at first, then with increasing warmth. Meanwhile, we filed a formal complaint against the fertility clinic, initiating what promised to be a lengthy legal process. The clinic's insurance company reached out with settlement offers, which we declined. This wasn't about money, it was about accountability. If it happened to us, it could have happened to other families, James insisted during a consultation with our lawyer. They need to review all their records, contact anyone potentially affected. The lawyer nodded sympathetically. That's precisely what we're demanding in the lawsuit. 3 months after Thomas's DNA test confirmed our suspicions, we decided it was time to tell Patricia the truth. We chose a Saturday morning, ensuring we had the entire weekend free to help her process the news. We sat her down in the living room, the 3 adults positioned carefully, James and I on the couch, Thomas in the armchair nearby. Am I in trouble? Patricia asked immediately, glancing between us with suspicion. Not at all, I assured her. But we need to talk to you about something important. James took a deep breath. Patricia, remember when we had those medical tests done a few months ago? The cheek swabs. She nodded. For the Family Medical History Project. That wasn't entirely true, James admitted. Those were DNA tests. Her brow furrowed. Like on those crime shows. Why would we need those? James looked to me for help, suddenly at a loss for words. Honey, I said gently, sometimes families are formed in unexpected ways. And sometimes, medical procedures don't go exactly as planned. Patricia's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. What are you saying? Thomas leaned forward slightly. Patricia, when your parents were trying to have a baby, they went to a special doctor for help. I know that part, she interrupted. You told me I was your special science baby. James smiled faintly at the phrase we'd used when she was younger. Yes, you are. But what we didn't know until recently was that at the clinic, there was a mix-up. A mix-up, she repeated slowly. With the samples they used, I explained. They accidentally used your Uncle Thomas's contribution instead of your dad's. Patricia stared at us, then at Thomas, her quick mind processing the implications. So you're saying that biologically he's my father? Not dad. Biologically, yes, Thomas said gently. But James is your dad in every way that matters. He's the one who raised you, who's been there for every moment of your life. Patricia sat in stunned silence for several long seconds. Then to our surprise she started to laugh. That's why I don't have the Campbell chin. I've been wondering about that forever. Her reaction, so practical, so quintessentially Patricia, broke the tension in the room. James laughed too, a relieved sound. That's what you're focused on. Your chin. He shrugged. Well, it explains a lot. Like why I'm good at drawing but terrible at sports. Dad can't draw a straight line, but Uncle Thomas is an architect. And a terrible baseball player, Thomas added with a small smile. Patricia turned serious again. So what does this mean? For us, I mean. James moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. It means our family just got a little bigger. Thomas is part of our lives now and he's connected to you in a special way. But nothing changes between you and me. I'm still your dad. And I'm still your mom, I added. And we both love you exactly the same as we always have. Patricia considered this. Can I still call you Dad? She asked James, her voice suddenly small. Always, he said fiercely, pulling her into a hug. I will always be your dad. Over Thomas's shoulder I saw Thomas watching them, tears in his eyes. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in a gesture of inclusion. And Thomas will be whatever you want him to be in your life, I told Patricia. We'll figure it out together. Patricia pulled back from James's embrace, wiping her eyes. This is weird, she declared. But kind of cool too. I mean, how many kids have two dads who are twins? Her resilience amazed me. This ability to absorb shocking news and find the positive angle. James often said she got that from me, but in moments like this I saw him in her too. Not in her DNA but in her character, shaped by 13 years of his love and guidance. In the months that followed, our family reconfigured itself around this new reality. Thomas moved from Grand Rapids to Lansing, taking a position with a local architectural firm to be closer to Patricia. Sunday dinners became a tradition, sometimes awkward but increasingly comfortable as we all adjusted to our new normal. James and Thomas's relationship transformed too, their 14-year estrangement replaced by a tentative brotherhood that grew stronger with each passing week. They remained different men, James practical and straightforward, Thomas more artistic and introspective, but they found common ground in their shared concern for Patricia's well-being. One evening, nearly a year after James's fateful question had shattered our peace, I found him and Thomas in the backyard, building a treehouse for Patricia. A project she had outgrown years ago but had suggested as a way for them to spend time together. I watched from the kitchen window as they worked side by side, passing tools back and forth without speaking, moving in the synchronized rhythm that only siblings seem to achieve. Their profiles against the setting sun highlighted their similarities and differences. Both tall and broad-shouldered, but James's stance more solid, Thomas's more fluid. Patricia joined me at the window. They're going to hurt themselves, she observed. Dad doesn't know the first thing about proper structural support. Dad? I asked, curious about which man she meant. James' dad, she clarified. She had taken to using James' dad and Thomas' dad when the distinction was necessary, though in direct address, James remained simply Dad, while Thomas was sometimes Thomas, and sometimes T-Dad, depending on her mood. He's got Thomas to help, I pointed out. Between the two of them, I'm sure they'll manage something that won't collapse immediately. Patricia grinned. Maybe. She leaned against me, suddenly reflective. Mom, are you ever mad about what happened? At the fertility clinic, I mean. I considered the question carefully. I was at first. It felt like our whole lives had been built on a mistake. But not anymore. I watched as James laughed at something Thomas said, the sound carrying through the open window. No, not anymore. Because that mistake gave us you. And now it's brought Thomas into our lives. Our family is different than we expected, but it's still our family. Patricia nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. I'm going to go help them before they hurt themselves, she decided, heading for the back door. I watched as she joined the men, immediately pointing out flaws in their design, making them laugh with her precise criticism. 3 distinct profiles against the sunset. Connected by blood and choice, by nature and nurture, by the complicated, beautiful bonds of family. James glanced back at the house, catching my eye through the window. He smiled, a real smile reaching his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in too long. I smiled back, feeling something settle inside me, a peace I'd thought we might never find again. Our family wasn't what we'd thought it was. The truth had shaken us, nearly broken us. But in rebuilding, we'd created something stronger. A family defined not by DNA or biology, but by the love we chose to give each other every day. And in the end, that choice was what mattered most.